the Make in India concept, which is being promoted today. The question is, can India's industrial base create self-reliance and reduce the dependence on import of military hardware? Can the Indian industry achieve competence and scales of production to compete with Chinese products that have flooded the market already?
Thinking ahead of times, China in 1977 had already begun its four-pronged modernization in the fields of agriculture, industry, defense, science, and technology. Like China, can India also achieve military self-reliance through reverse engineering and intense research and development? And what are the timelines that we should be looking at to achieve Atmanirbharta in defense, science, and technology?
Well, we have on the panel with us Mr. Vishnu Som. Vishnu Som is a senior editor and principal anchor with NDTV. Som has reported extensively on war, environment, conflict, aviation, and natural disasters. He has covered Kargil, Afghanistan, Iraq wars, and natural calamities alike. The 2004 Asian tsunami, the 2001 Bhuj earthquake, and 2011 Japan earthquake and tsunami. In April 2012, he was awarded the Best Television Presenter in India by the News Television Awards. Som has completed a multi-part documentary series called Great Battles and has produced a documentary series called India's Underwater Treasures, which won the Best Series Award at the Indian Tele Awards. His program, The Jet Set, gave an insight into the experience of flying along with pilots on fighter aircrafts.
Rahul Bedi has been a journalist for over 40 years, and in that, for 30 years, he has been the New Delhi correspondent for UK's Jain Defence Weekly. For Jains, he reports regularly on assorted Indian military matters with regard to procurements, domestic defence industry, material indigenization efforts, and service doctrines, amongst other defence-related aspects. He is the India correspondent for the Daily Telegraph UK and the Irish Times in Dublin, for which he reports on foreign policy matters and current affairs.
Rajiv Chandrasekhar, a member of the Parliament Rajya Sabha. He is a member of Bharatiya Janata Party and also the national spokesperson of BJP. He was the vice chairman of the Kerala wing of the BJP-led coalition National Democratic Alliance. He represents the state of Karnataka. Presently, Chandrasekhar serves in several crucial parliamentary committees. Chandrasekhar ji is the founder and advisor to the board of Jupiter Capital Private Limited.
Brigadier Suresh Gangadharan is an EME officer and has held various appointments in his army career, both technical and staff. During the span of his service, the officer held appointments at Army Headquarters, Border Road Organization, Military College of Electronics and Mechanical Engineers, Trial Service Command of Andaman Nicobar Strike Corps. He has served in counterinsurgency areas and commanded an army-based workshop as well. The officer is the recipient of 4 Chief of Army Staff commendations and 2 Army Commander commendations for his distinguished service.
Mr. Harpal Singh. Harpal Singh has a diverse and wide-ranging experience of over 40 years in the corporate sector. In the last decade, he has substantially engaged with the not-for-profit sector holds senior board-level positions in the national and international organizations, addressing social causes around disadvantaged children, public health, and the girl child and the environment.
Moderating this panel is Mr. M.V. Kotwal, who is a member of the L&T board and the president heading the Heavy Engineering Division. He headed the nuclear and the special fabrication shops in Mumbai before taking charge of critical functions at L&T's works complex in Hazira, Surat. Currently, in addition to Mumbai and Hazira, he is responsible for facilities located at 5 other work centers in India and abroad. He was awarded Business Leader of the Year 2009 by Chemtech Foundation, Mumbai, for development of the engineering studies. He is keenly interested in playing cricket, badminton, and table tennis, and in listening to classical music, and keeps himself abreast with developments in technology and business.
Over to you, Mr. Kotwal.
Yeah, good afternoon to all of you, and thank you very much, Major Bikramjit and Aradhika, for doing a great job of introducing the speakers, because that saves a lot of time and is done very crisply. Thank you. The subject we have to deal with is, of course, very important. as was said earlier, and is very close to my heart because I've spent more than 4 decades in the field of defense equipment on the corporate side, of course, the manufacturing. Now, coming to this whole subject of defense preparedness, I think one is to understand a few basics. What the Honorable Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh ji said last year. He said a country of India's size and global prominence cannot afford to rely on imported arms to conduct its sovereign defense and foreign policy. I think this sums up a lot of things. Now, in this entire gamut of facilities that are already available in India, there are 9 DPSUs, 41 ordnance factories, there are 50 defense labs, and there are more than 70 license holding private companies. So it's a huge workforce available. As far as indigenely designed air surveillance platforms, patrols, vessels for the Navy, the Defense Minister has already announced that there will be a procurement reserved for Indian manufacturers close to 27,000 crores. There's also a recent announcement that some 101 systems will be reserved for manufacture in India. These are all very interesting things for the industry. And of course, we hope that these things will be followed up. Now, the other thing to understand, and this brings back a very important and much quoted sentence, it is credited to none other than John Glenn. And I just want to quote it to be on the lighter side. He was asked that how do you feel when you're getting on the launch pad, the first Atlas rocket, 1962. And he said, I felt exactly how you would feel if you were getting ready to launch and knew you were sitting on top of 2 million parts, all built by the lowest bidder on a government contract. So this sort of brings out a lot of things in it. And what we really need to apply ourselves to is, when we talk about policy, are we talking about a long-term, politically neutral, national security policy? Is it going to be supported by assured funding for R&D and long-term projects? So proactive really implies emphasis on eliminating weaknesses. Now, where are the weaknesses that we have? In conceptualization, innovation and design, electronics hardware, future generation manufacturing, system integration, and project management. These, I would say, are the core issues where if we do not have some long-term policies, we will not succeed to become a major power with complete self-reliance. Here I want to make a distinction between what is commonly understood self-reliance and self-sufficiency. We can acquire self-sufficiency easier by acquiring equipment and stocking it so that we are not left without the important equipment that we need. But when you talk about self-reliance, one is talking about something much, much deeper, which in my opinion takes decades to build. So I would here now hand over to Brigadier Brigadier Suresh. And now, of course, his background has already been given to you, so I don't have to waste any further time. And over to Brigadier Suresh. The format we want to follow here is, we would like each of the speakers, the 5 eminent speakers, to dwell on their thoughts. And after that, we'll have a kind of discussion and answer any Q&A. Thank you very much. Over to you, Brigadier Suresh.
Thank you so much, sir. And good afternoon, everybody. And it's a very interesting topic per se to me as an engineer and the maintainer of the Indian Army. So let me start with the quote of the Honorable Prime Minister that Naya Bharat ek Saksham, Surakshit or Shaktishali Desh hoga. It got a lot of meaning when we say, after seeing the present state of India with the neighboring nations as of now, what we are undergoing. As all of us know, the India is almost accounting for about 12% of the global imports, and out of that, about 70 to 80% of our own arms and related equipments. So, as a nation, we had thought of and initiated the Making India. Now, Atmanirbhar Bharat, that self-reliant India, is the base on which we all of us are working and looking towards it. So what happened in our period of last about a month or so, or rather about a year or so, So, like what sir said, it is the FDI from the automatic route is increased from 49 to 74%. Then the abolishment of import of 101 equipments in terms of culminating by 2025, not to import anything from that. Then the cooperation of ordnance factories being thought of by listing in the public. Thereafter, the GOCO, that is government owned, the government assets of the army based workshop, which is overhauling the engineer, the warlike equipment, is likely to get cooperatives and modernized to meet the urgent requirement. And the project management union or unit is being thinking of by the India. So the things are quite positive. Rather than that positivity, what is the importance of the difference what we had from the past and present? That is very important. First and foremost is the Honorable Prime Minister or the government and the ministries and the bureaucrats and the industry. All of us are now positively and thinking a mission of self-reliant India. That's quite a good change. And a synergized effort is being undertaken as a roadmap and a focused approach. And appointment of a CDS, everybody know. Now the CDS is almost having a hold of the tri-services requirement at the apex level. So it's going to be a good change, I can say. So overall, the changes are there. So now, what do you mean by self-reliance? That is the question what I want to throw a question. It is self-reliant may not be what I per se is to make each and everything by you, and it may not be that cost effective what we may think. I personally feel it's a sourcing of an inventory at your own term, at your own cost, and at your own time, and a scope of aggregation and assured supply, which will translate into an economic growth of the country in terms of GDP, and to cut the import in terms of the outside. That could be the meaning of the self-reliance per se is concerned. So where are we now? What are the strength as a nation, as we are already proved to the world? You can say the missile and satellite technology, the nuclear technology, the communication technology. We can assure the world that we are much ahead. And the potential software base, though it is yet to be reaping the dividends, but we have the potential software base. And heavy industry base, as everybody knows, in the days to come, the India will be one of the major factor for the abundance in terms of the young labor and a strong MSME structure. And network of ordnance and DPSUs and R&Ds are there. So we have a strong base where we can grow further and further. But there is a but always. As a country, we have the drawdowns. That is a delay in the industrial acquisition process, and still there is a lack of orientation. Let me tell you, there is a lack of trust between the industry and the government even today also. Maybe we may further improve upon the time to come. And poor manufacturing environment in terms of the meshing up of the requirement is yet to be still to be meshed together. And gestation period. This is one of the most critical thing what we are facing now. We are thinking something, we are putting some effort, but it is not coming and delivering at the right time. So it is escalating into the in the inflation. It is escalating into in terms of the problems with the scaling of the technology. Then we are lagging behind. So and there is another thing called I have a feeling that we are firmly believing in more of believing the output rather than the process. So we are still lagging in the R&D. We have a strong industrial base. We have strong academia. We have strong people to work, but we are still not putting enough energy into the R&D per se to mesh it out, rather than what I told the strength in the before. And the project management group, though it is in place, and the single window solution, what we claim, is actually not able to give a solution, because the sub-verticals under the single solution window is also having their own rules, which it cannot be overruled by the single solution authority. So we have issues there. So recently I happened to see the one of the article, Vedi sir here. So it is giving that DRDO lags about 2 technical cycles behind, and so much so. So having seen all the plus and minuses, still we are in the positive side. Still we are in the growing side, where we have come to know that the defense corridors have been established, being thought of in one in UP and one in Tamil Nadu, and thereafter we are thinking in terms of meshing up the MSMEs. Today's if you see the news today, the MSMEs to be integrated with the IITs and the engineering college. That's a good sign. Today, Honorable Raksha Mantriji already dedicated some facilities to the 3 services chief. So it's all are good things to happen. And the Navy and Air Force had taken a forefront in terms of the Indonesian way back. However, Army is also into the forefront now, and they have made an organization called Army Design Bureau, which is always thinking to mesh up the industry, the technology, the people to the needs of the Army. And also we are thinking of innovation for defense excellence, where we are focusing more on the startups. We are trying to give the problem statement to the industry so that a viable solution can come up. So it is a very, 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 very growing path and greenery path we are looking forward. But mind you, what I said in the Self-Reliance, it is not making everything at your own. That be the case. If you want to host a party at home, we should have gone for everything at your home, but we don't do. It is economy, time, and dictation of what you dictate. For that, I have few recommendations which can be of taking the initiative further ahead. One is to have a national vision, that already we have set up the vision in terms of Atmanirbhar Bharat, irrespective of the change in the thought process in terms of government or political bodies. We should, as a nation, we should have this vision to continue. Atmanirbhar Bharat or the self-reliant India should be the mantra if you want to continue the progression. That is what the first and foremost vision. Secondly, the standardization of in defense inventory. What I mean to say is, often when you see and go around see the defense background, we often see the qualitative requirement or general staff requirement of a particular weapon system or a combat vehicle may match each other, but still we have a different inventory in the complete system. So we have to think of a standardization of the defense inventory for a common cause. That is a must for our self-reliance to days to come, so that the manufacturer's facility can be reaped upon for the economy of effort. The second is the scalability. Scalability, what I mean to say is that a particular weapon, when we are having this thought process is already put in the ground, we should think how this can be modular in terms of future use. So that scalability will obviously eliminate the repeated cost in the days to come. That is already there in the missile system so far, and long-range vectors, if you can see. And if you see the BrahMos, it's already proved it is a concept we should think of in the days to come, sir. Then the seamless integration of the military and R&D, academia, and the industry. Today, we are thinking of giving this the process statement or the problem statement to a particular project management group. Thereafter, the continuation of the process is not there at all. And the importance of the defense R&D in terms of equipment to be meshed up in terms of the complete paraphernalia, what I already mentioned. It's a must, sir. Coming to the multiple players of R&D and the procurement or a design for a warlike equipment. What I mean to say in this particular aspect, the system always feels that we select one partner, and finally after going to the iteration, then we invest on that, then we look forward a project. What I mean to say is that after meeting the QR, why can't we think of having a multiple partners or multiple partners for an R&D? Investment. Thereafter, you come to a result, and one of them will get succeeded. After success of that, the production capacity of the all three or all two can be utilized for the mass production. So nobody is losing their effort, So the defense in the industry or civil industry will have more of a faith in you. Yes, when we work with the defense, I am going to get the benefit back in terms of the major share or at least a minor partnership share. So a multiple partners for R&D or investment in the design is a way of some we can think of, sir.
Brigadier, could you wind up in the next minute or so? Thank you.
So, and the joint venture, sir, it's proven its potentials all very well. And the easiness of business, I already mentioned, sir. The easiness of business is a must to happen because it is still lacking in our system, though it has to come from the top-driven kind of approach. We have to ensure the easiness of business is ensured for the partners what we are associating, sir. An infusion of MSME, sir, and integration of expertise of the people who have worked on the ground and they have finished the mandated service in the various sectors. We have to reap in the potential because defense sector is the acquired expertise is a must. So we have to get the expertise even after the mandatory engagement to the requirement of the nation. And the resource pooling of the friendly nations. That is what the point I was initially relying upon, that we feel there are some resources of the neighboring nations are also potential to grow together. So we may have to invest in those nations also in the self-reliant thought process, so that we have to invest in the R&D there, we have to put the PSUs there, we have to put the industry there, and make and manufacture togetherly and use for together this. That's a point I thought I will impress upon. And lastly, but not the least, the transfer of technology and indigenous in what we talk about. We normally see a backdoor effort of getting the components from outside, but the component the level can be increased from today to a level of reaching 100% in the days to come. That is how the real indigenous to happen to realize in the days to come. So with this, sir, the nature is giving us so much of resource. The India is giving us so much of resource. The only thing is we have to measure the resource and think little different than also to get the self-reliant India as a reality. That's what.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brigadier, for an excellent presentation. May I now request Sir Pal Singh to step in with his huge experience in the corporate sector and, of course, so many social sectors. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Pal Singh.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kotwal, and thank you, Brigadier, for that very extensive comment with your experience. And of course, also, I do want to compliment the Military Literature Festival for creating such wonderful space in this arena, nationally, not internationally. I thought that what I would share with you, and I think that on the panel, we have some very great expertise, people who study this arena with great depth. And I thought one approach that I might bring to the table for our thinking is, what does the citizen think about resilience and about preparedness? What's the citizen's view and perspective on these two very critical sort of aspects that we are discussing today? And let me start by saying, unquestionably, in the minds of the citizen, national security is a very, very emotive issue, and that evokes actually a very strong positive response from citizens when the issue of national security is discussed. In the minds of citizens, self-reliance is actually a desire, and actually that comes from the perspective that citizens wish to have a sense of assurance and a sense of confidence that our ecosystem, which is the defense ecosystem, has the ability to defend the country, to defend its borders, to defend its sovereignty. And in that, clearly speaking, in the current context, as has been the case oftentimes in our history, that in the current context where we have very belligerent neighbors, and certainly those who are challenging and threatening adversaries they are. And hence, in this context, the citizen must surely be asking themselves the question, how prepared are we as a country? And if we are prepared, what is the foundation of that preparedness? Is it based on accepted level of self-reliance or self-sufficiency? Or is it that we are hugely dependent still on others in whatever nature of dependence that might be required? And I think in answering those two questions, the citizen will certainly have some very significant queries. Now, interestingly, the citizen also, if you were to go to a farmer in Punjab, or you were to go to for that matter, a simple rural citizen anywhere, and ask them about what does resilience really mean, and what does preparedness really mean, and you'll be surprised how actually well informed in rather simple terms they are about what they mean by resilience. Obviously, at its most basic level, it is a force that can sort of fully defend itself if challenged by an adversary. But they also recognize that in achieving this resilience, in achieving this preparedness, there are a large number of stakeholders that have to work together. There is the stakeholder, the most important one, called the armed forces. There is then the stakeholder called the productive capacity of the country, which largely so far has been relying on the public sector, and then, of course, now of late trying to join hands with the private sector. And so that represents the productive capacity of the country. The third, of course, and very important one is really the political and administrative leadership in the sector. And unless and until all those, the armed forces, the productive, the producers, the political leaders together, this will not be to achieve that resilience. And post the World War, the last World War, there was a term which is not quite common in the usage of even common citizens, is the military-industrial complex. And the military-industrial complex, as we understand it, one way to define complex is the vast number of stakeholders who need to work together, and that's the complex, that's the ecosystem. But at another level, incidentally, and I think maybe we've not addressed it in that way, complex also actually means what the term means. It's a very complex arrangement of relationships. They have to be based on a bunch of fundamental premises, and if those complex relationships are not managed well, we're not likely to be able to succeed. So frankly speaking, what we're talking about is a grand alliance between the forces, between the productive capacity of the country, and between the leadership, both at the political and at the level. So that is the question, and I'd love to hear some answers from some of our other colleagues on the panel. That is our ecosystem, our defense ecosystem, well-oiled, and is it effective in delivering on the outcomes that the citizen desires of this ecosystem? And so if that is to happen, there has to be great harmony amongst the operations of these stakeholders. And the question, therefore, is there harmony? Do they actually work together in the manner that they should? And I'm not going to answer that simply because I don't think I'm as informed, but surely some of our other speakers will address this issue in the interest of citizens, that how harmonious is that relation, so that the outcomes, desired outcomes, can be achieved. Now, I think Brigadier spoke about this in the previous one. Considering this is a long-term relationship, considering this requires vast amounts of public and private investment, considering that it requires innovation, which oftentimes is more fraught with failure than with success, but that's the kind of investment required. If that be so, one foundational element has to be trust between the stakeholders. Trust between the stakeholders. And I think that trust of late has, there are very good attempts to ensure that one other key player to this is the private sector, and the private sector so far, right since incidentally the first inception of our defense policy was to say that we were very suspicious, and at some level, I might even use the word contemptful of the private sector's ability to contribute to the arena. But that has changing, but I think we still probably have some distance to travel on that, and hopefully that will be the case. Now, can we assess the situation? Now, I'm speaking in the sense as a private citizen.
Excuse me, could you finish in a minute or so? Sorry for the interruption.
Yes, so after spending 60, 70 years, why is it that we still have to import 70% of our requirements for defense? Good question to ask. Maybe some of our other speakers will answer that somewhat more wholesomely. Many people have talked about the inadequacy of some of our productive capacities as in DRDO, in the DSUs, and I would be wary of commenting on them. I hope that we will hear somebody else commenting about them. But I want to leave ourselves with one thought. Equally important area and institution that meets world-class standards of cost, quality, and acceptability is ISRO. They make very powerful products for the country, satellites and missiles and what have you. And look at how they have demonstrated their ability to produce world-class products. I would like to understand, why is it that one arm of an association of an ecosystem in that arena produces such good results, whereas we are not able to do the same in our areas of defense? So let me sort of finally say this. In the last aspect of the citizens' concern is the morale of the forces. And the morale of the forces will hugely depend upon how we are able to assure the armed forces and the soldiers and the men and women in uniform that all their needs to be an effective force are available and will be available to them. That's what we need to, I think, assure to them. Now, if that is to happen, and if we are able to do that, I think citizens who are very passionate about defense, who are very passionate in supporting our soldiers in uniform, be they men or women, I think that will give them the comfort, the confidence, and the assurance that we have the required systems, the weapons, the processes, the leadership for the defense of the country, and be assured that here's a force that is both resilient and prepared. That's the citizens' view, and I hope we will hear some answers from some of the other speakers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harpal Singh, for bringing out a totally different perspective, which is very important, really. May I now request the one and only Mr. Vishnu Som. Why I say this is because you hear of so many anchors. Very rarely do you come across a person who has physically gone across the globe in fast jets. He has gone into the real tough environment of Siachen himself. So he talks with experience on the ground. So I would love to hear Mr. Vishnu Som. My only request to the speakers is please try and maintain time because with respect to the other speakers, and more importantly, we want to have an interesting discussion after this. Thank you very much. Mr. Vishnu Som, please.
Thank you very much. Am I audible? Am I clear?
Absolutely
you, Mr.
clear. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'd like to thank the Military Literature Festival, Mandeep Bajwa and the other organizers for having me on board. It's my second time speaking at this venue, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity for a lot of people to come together and share their experiences in all sorts of areas of our armed forces. I am here to speak about why my belief in the Defense Research and Development Organization, the larger ecosystem, and the process of indigenous weapon systems is perhaps very different from what is widely perceived. In fact, Mr. Harpal Singh just a little while back made a very interesting observation when he said that how is it that ISRO is an area of real excellence in this country, and how is it that we don't seem to be able to match the ability of ISRO with our domestic manufacture of weapons? I would actually argue, and I would argue this on the basis of a lot of facts, that India today, in the last 10 years, has made remarkable strides in the process of defense manufacture. And over the course of the next 8 odd minutes, which are remaining, I would like to highlight to you a couple of important systems, weapons, which define a part of that process, whereby we have reached a certain level of manufacturing proficiency, a certain level of engineering proficiency, integration proficiency, and combatability, which is something which is not spoken about. But before I actually do that, I think it's important to put it in perspective. Our defense research and development organization ecosystem faces a profound image crisis. We can manufacture state of the art missiles. We can build the BrahMos, we can build the LCA, we can design warships to our specifications. We can actually think about having a workable ballistic missile defense system in the next couple of years. And proven more than it is right now. But why is it then that we still have a system where the armed forces, let's face it, frown at the DRDO setup, the process of indigenous manufacture, where private manufacturers look at DRDO and say, look, it's taken them 20 odd years to get the Tejas flying, let's forget about them and please import from us? On what basis are these observations made when in fact on the ground, on the basis of rail technology, it's completely to the contrary? Who are the people that the DRDO has making world-class technologies? Who are the researchers? Who are the engineers? Who are the thinkers? Do we know them? We don't. Beyond the chairman of DRDO or a couple of other people, the system itself has failed in identifying its own ability to actually manufacture the state of the art. And let me give you one small example of this. A couple of weeks back, India tested a hypersonic glide vehicle, a vehicle which could travel at upwards of Mach 5. In the future, it could possibly go beyond Mach 7. It's only Russia now that has something which is similar and has been weaponized and is in the process of slow induction. And that's a weapon system called the Avant-Garde. But here in India, on the basis of our own technology, we've actually successfully test flown a hypersonic glide vehicle. That day, when I asked for a sound bite from the DRDO chairman, I was told, absolutely, Vishnu, we are here to help and we want to project this great. And then there was a PRO with a little cell phone in front of the DRDO chairman, shaking as he made some sort of statement. And I think to myself, here we are as a nation which is building hypersonic technology, and we cannot project it by even having a soundbite recorded and sent across on WhatsApp. If you look at the DRDO website, it is the most unappealing website that you would find for an organization which has done so very well in certain areas. It's not done very well in others, and I don't mean to suggest that it's brilliant in all respects, but there are areas where it's done very well. In fact, I often think to myself, had I not been doing what I was doing, then what I would really have loved to have done is to revamp the image of the DRDO system, the entire process of defense manufacture. Why do they have such appalling websites? Why is it that the transfer of information is so slow? Why is it that image projection is so awful? Not because you want to project image and you have nothing to show. This is a case of you having a lot to show and your inability to actually communicate it. But let me give you a couple of more details of what I am talking about. Firstly, the three systems which I'm going to focus on in this naval shipbuilding, I'll be looking at the Project 15 Bravo destroyers being built for the Indian Navy. I'll talk about the light combat aircraft and briefly touch upon where we stand as far as radar technology is concerned. In fact, I can share screen as well at this stage, just to give you an idea of what we are looking at. So share screen, let's see if this works out. All right, is this picture clear? So this is actually Project 15 Bravo, Project 15 Alpha destroyer, the Kolkata class destroyers. India is actually making a more advanced variant of this, and there'll be 4 ships which will be coming online. There's the Vishakhapatnam, the Mormugao, the Imphal.
Excuse me, Vishnu, we are not able to see the screen. We are not able to see
You aren't able to see the screen. Okay, so let me just give it one more shot and see if I can get it to actually work. Double click here. Share. Is that visible now?
No.
Not yet.
All right.
Now it's on. Now it's on.
All
Now
right,
you're
great.
okay.
So this is the Kolkata class, or the Project 15A destroyer. The Project 15B, which is a follow-up of this particular design, is the first of the classes now, and is going to be entering advanced testing very soon. This is state of the art by any standard. This is designed by Indian naval engineers. It's built together by Mazgaon docks and others as well, increasingly the shipyards. This has been perfected by Indian engineers. It integrates weapon systems from around the world to an Indian design and an Indian requirement. The future ability of this warship to actually meet emerging threats, such as ballistic missile defense, is something which is absolutely visible. It's armed with the Barak 8 surface-to-air missile system. We call it the MR-SAM. It flies out to a range of approximately 70 kilometers. It's being built now in Hyderabad with Israeli collaboration. It has very easily the possibility of being upgunned to strike targets at more than 110, 120 kilometers, if not much more. They won't tell us the exact ranges. The MF star weapon sensor, the primary sensor, the air search and surface search radar, can actually be used in the future as a ballistic missile detection platform. It can be worked on. It's essentially a software fix. The BrahMos anti-ship cruise missiles and the anti-surface cruise missiles flying in at Mark 8, which is now you can essentially call it an Indian weapon system. It's perhaps the most advanced weapon of its class in the world. And India's ability is showcased in a platform like this, which, yes, it's got Israeli systems, Indian systems, it's got American systems in terms of the helicopters, it's got a Dutch secondary radar system, Ukrainian systems as well in terms of the gas turbines. But the fact of the matter is this: we have successfully integrated this particular warship with what it is that we require. And I would urge people to understand that indigenization and Atmanirbhar Bharat needs to be based on reality. There is no country in the world, perhaps other than Russia, which manufactures everything that they require on their weapon systems. It's about picking and choosing and not reinventing the wheel, because it doesn't make any sense at all. In fact, let me give you one small example of this. We often speak about the light combat aircraft Tejas. I'll talk about that in a little while. But this, in fact, is...
You may have to speed up a bit because I think
Got it.
your time
How many minutes?
It's such an interesting presentation. Sorry.
Right. So this is, in fact, the Swedish Gripen fighter. And the point over here is, as we criticize the DRDO system for not being able to manufacture component A and component B and having to import it, if you look at the Swedish Gripen, it's got a gun from Germany, it's got a side stick and throttle lever from the United Kingdom, it's got composite materials from France, it's got weapons possibly from Israel as well, engine components from Canada, auxiliary power units from the Netherlands, some structural components from South Africa, and yet it is seen to be an entirely Swedish weapon system. So when we actually talk about the light combat aircraft and say that, oh, you know what, the engine isn't ours, then let's be smart. We've tried to make the engine, it's not worked. We've actually got an immensely reliable American weapon system right now. And therefore, we need to be realistic about what we can achieve and what we have achieved, again, in the field of our indigenous technology. I'll just bring up another image if I can over here, so that we can talk a little bit about the Tejas itself. Let's talk a little bit about the Tejas. This is actually a weapon system I know quite well. I've had the fortune of flying a sortie on the Tejas aircraft. I am up to date with the radar technology it employs. It presently has an Israeli radar. It's got a reliable American engine. But let's look at what we in India have actually managed to do. A quadruple redundant fly-by-wire system, carbon composite technology, which is being seen across the board. We've got the Astra air-to-air missile system, which is being integrated. We've got Indian data links, which are in the works. We've got a radar warning system, which is Indian as well. We've got a mission computer, which is Indian as well, and countless other structures in this particular platform, which make it an extremely viable platform for the Indian Air Force. And therefore, where exactly is the criticism? Here's where a part of that criticism comes in. People would say that, look, if you look at the LCA Tejas, it's taken forever to actually come on board. Is that true? In fact, it's not true. Let me give you an example. The Rafale, which we speak about, had its first flight on the 4th of July 1986. It was inducted in the French Air Force on the 18th of May 2001, 15 years. The Tejas's first flight was on the 4th of January 2001, introduction on the 17th of January 2015, 14 years. From the first flight to squadron induction, it took less for the Tejas than it did for the Rafale. Let's give you another example. The Eurofighter that we talk about. It's taken 9 years between the first flight and squadron induction. So yes, 5 years less than the Tejas, but 6 years less than the Rafale. So this is no ground to be slamming a weapon system. And the fact is we have an ecosystem which cannot communicate this effectively, which is such a problem very often. So I've spoken about the Project 15 destroyers. I've spoken about the project, the LCA itself. I have one more weapon system which I think I can touch on before I start wrapping up in about a minute from now, if that is okay. And what I will show you is the Project 17 destroyer, which is in the works right now. In fact, we have the Project 17 Alpha ships, which are now going to be building. And the point I want to actually mention over here is that in as much as these warships have a brilliant capability similar to the Kolkata class destroyers, there is one other aspect that we need to understand, and this is the point that's important. Domestic weapons do not come cheap. The belief is that we will make it in India and it'll be cheaper can only occur if there is a scale of manufacture which is humongous. In the case of 8 warships, which you can afford, or 7 warships of a class, or 83 LCA Tejas aircraft, that is not enough to give you the scale to bring down the costs substantially. Therefore, do not for a moment believe that the state of the art where you have reached right now is going to come cheap. In fact, the Project 15 Bravo destroyers I showed you earlier come to 35,800 crores or $5 billion for the project of 5 ships, or for the project of 4 ships, I believe, or $1.5 billion a single warship. What you see on your screen is a plan for 7 Project 17A frigates. The first one, it's called the Nilgiri class, 45,000 crores or $6.3 billion for a planned 7 construction. So again, the point is, if we want state of the art, one needs to understand that it's not going to come cheap at all. Which brings me to my last couple of sentences. It is my sincere belief that the DRDO setup faces, number one, a profound image crisis. It is unable to get out of that. Number two, like foreign weapons manufacturers, our defense sector faces a huge problem of being unable to get funding. It's taken more than a year for the government to actually talk about the LCA Mark 1A. That has still not been signed. It's in the works. Why? Because ultimately the finances are limited. So let us attribute a lot of the delay as well to the fact that we just don't have the weapons, the money to buy the weapon systems that we need on time, neither from abroad nor from India. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vishnu, because it's a great presentation and we wish we would have had more time to listen to all that you had to say. So thank you. And this is an ideal platform for the next speaker, Mr. Rahul Bedi. I'm sure he'll add a lot of new dimensions to it. Thank you very much. Over to you, Rahul.
Thank you, Mr. Kotwal. I am going to be slightly at odds with some of the previous speakers, and I'll probably reiterate some of the things they've said. Principally, I think we do, as far as the DRDO is concerned, we do a reasonable job. But as far as indigenization is concerned, I think there is a multiplicity of agencies which are tasked with indigenization, and that is one of the major problems. There is firstly the DRDO Defense Technology Fund. Then there is the IDEX, which I think Brigadier Suresh referred to. Then there are the capability plans of the respective services. And to add to that, there are the defense public sector units, which are also involved in various indigenization efforts. So I think this hodgepodge and this multiplicity of agencies and multiplicity of policies leads to a lot of confusion. And although I do agree that the LCA has finally been produced, I think the Air Force is very skeptical about the capabilities of the LCA. Let's not forget that the LCA was initiated in 1983 and was inducted into squadron service, I think, in 2016 or 2017. But at the slightly lower end of the scale, I mean, we are event managers in this country, and we have produced nuclear submarines. We have, again, but unfortunately with the Russian help, to miniaturize the reactor. We have produced a lot of missile systems in the strategic sphere. We are doing extremely well. But at the lower end of the scale, I mean, just a small example, which I've never really got an answer for. I mean, right now, the Indian Army is deployed on the Chinese border, and we've had frantic shopping worth billions of dollars for winter equipment. Now, for the last 36 years, we've been in Siachen. We've been needing this winter equipment, but we've been importing it, and we continue to import it. And over the last 6 or 8 months, we've gone out and shopped. Similarly, meat and potatoes thing for the Army, an assault rifle. We've spent years and years and years producing the INSAS rifle, which is the 5.56 millimeter rifle, which was finally inducted into the Indian Army in the mid-90s, but rejected in 2010. We went in for imports. We just signed a deal with a US company to import about 72,400 assault rifles, which is a repeat order. Conversely, we have an AK Kalashnikov AK-203 rifle, which is being planned to be produced under license with the Ordnance Factory Board. But unfortunately, the costing of the rifle produced by the Ordnance Factory Board is about 87,000 rupees per unit. And amortizing this over about 650,000 units brings the cost down to about 80 or 81,000 per assault rifle. Now, the imported weapon from the US is priced at $990, which is roughly about 72,000 rupees. So, I mean, there is a problem with the indigenization efforts at most levels because of the confusion and because of the lack of coordination of a single agency to oversee the indigenization efforts, which are long, long overdue. And unfortunately, indigenization is also looked at purely in rupees and naya paisa terms, and it's not looked at in technology terms. I think there is no technology audit that has been done over the last maybe 25 or 30 years to determine what technologies we need, what technologies we can incorporate, what technologies we need to import. And I think for the last 30 or 40 years, we more or less been license building, whether it's been aircraft or helicopters. Similarly, helicopters, for example, which is a very crucial requirement for the Indian Army and the Indian Air Force. We've been using the Cheetahs and the Chetaks, which were inducted in the mid-60s. We've been talking to the Russians since 2014 to license build the Kamov 226. One of the sticking points over that has been the indigenization efforts, because the Indian Army and the Indian Air Force wants to buy about 200 of these helicopters, 60 of which are going to be imported directly, and the remaining 140 are going to be built locally with increasing levels of indigenization. Now, that is run into a huge, huge storm between India and Russia. Now, and it's quite possible that the contract would be cancelled, which would be disastrous because the Cheetahs and the Chetaks are well beyond their lifespan. So the indigenization is a problem. The Navy, on the other hand, has taken the lead in indigenizing its requirements. It's built, as the previous speaker said, it's built very competent warships. It's in the process of testing an aircraft carrier, but still it remains import dependent for a majority of its requirements, like propulsion or its weapon systems. So I think we have to reach some kind of reality as far as our indigenization is concerned. And as again the previous speaker said, indigenization requires, in the medium and long term, a lot of money, and that is something that is in short supply. And particularly currently, I think the economy is in terrible shape and is in a state of recession. So I don't know how we're going to manage the 101 items that we are going to be making locally over the next 5 years. I mean, and I'll end. I'm not going to take up more of your time, Mr. Kothwal. I think I've been covering defense for the last 30 years, and I've been hearing about indigenization, I think, since 1995, when Abdul Kalam was the DRDO head. And he talked about reaching self-sufficiency levels by 2005. Well, we are in 2020. In 2013 and in 2018, there was a technology perspective capability roadmap. And in fact, the 2018 technology roadmap talked about 221 items which would be indigenized and produced locally. I think we are very, very far away from that. And we've pruned down that list of 221 to 101. So let's see if we get a little real and manage to achieve that, because self-sufficiency as a principle is excellent and is something we should strive for. But I think we need to get a little real, and we need to have an overarching agency which looks at this in a holistic way, and not tough battles should not be fought between the private sector and the public sector. I think the government has been a little ambivalent about protecting not only the DPSUs but also the OFB. So I think, and Mr. Kothwal, being from L&T, would know that, because they've been involved in a lot of naval projects. So I think it's a constant battle, and it's a trust deficit, as again one of the previous speakers said, between the private and the public sector, and the government, and the agencies, because most of the contracts are looked upon with a lot of suspicion and a lot of undue diligence, which makes people a little nervous about dealing with these projects. So I'll end on that, saying that we should get a little realistic, and we should be prepared to spend a huge amount of money over the next 10 or 15 years to develop our indigenous capabilities, and do so in a planned and phased manner. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Rahul, because this is something which really brought us to realistic levels. I fortunately have been associated with defense for a pretty long time, seen some real successes and some failures. So both of what you pointed out, Vishnu and Rahul, both have got some points which maybe in the discussion I'll bring out some case studies which bring out what is happening, and that's something which is very interesting. Now, the last, but I'm sure the most weighty, Chandrasekhar, and we look forward, sir, to your views and how you look at the whole scene. And again, here we have, I think, arguably the most technology-savvy parliamentarian that we have in the country. So over to you, Rajiv Chandrasekhar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the Military Lit Fest for having me this afternoon. I think we're all strapped for time. I will pick up from where Mr. Bedi's left off, and I will accept and I will acknowledge what he says, that there have been multiple technology perspective plans. We have had many slogans in the past: self-sufficiency, self-reliance, indigenization, etc., etc. And so there is a healthy skepticism, and naturally so, of another new slogan called Atmanirbhar Bharat. And so a lot of cynics will turn around and say, but is this the same of the old stuff, which is that we keep talking about building our capacities and capabilities, but do we have a new strategy to do it? Is there a new how to the why? And I think that is where we are starting to make a difference and starting to evolve a different roadmap. Let me start by saying, I think this issue of self-sufficiency and indigenization is built into the history of India since we became independent. This whole socialism, we will build what we use, and if we don't build something world-class, you go fight your wars anyway, is something that people who are in this military lit fest and who have understood has been the underlying philosophy of the government DPSUs and the labs saying, fine, this is what we can do. And fine, if it's dated and it's generationally not competitive with what the enemy has, tough luck. That has been effectively our definition of self-sufficiency. That is, we will put in a lot of effort, we will put in good faith, and what we come up with, whether it is the P-17 or P-15, or it is the LCA, or it's the Vijayanta tank, or it's HF-24 in the 50s and the 60s, we will just trundle along with it and say this is something that we made, it's made in India, and we will make the best of it. Here is where I want to make a slightly different point, which is the point that while we have succeeded as a nation in building platforms, conceiving systems, whether they are in the space segment, whether they are in the military segment, I really think it is time for us to start looking at what I believe is what the most important missing piece here, which is a strategic military tech roadmap. Military technology, for those who understand technology, is a very different class of technology. It is not, now for everybody who has a computer and says he's an IT specialist, and with great respect to Brigadier Suresh, when we say we have a great IT industry in India, it is not the same as saying we have a great military technology capability. They are like going to high school and going to engineering school. They are a level of skill and capability apart. So the fact that the focus of military tech has been for years and decades, in a sense, built on the DRDO and the labs. And the labs themselves have been conceived as the Soviet-style, monopolistic models of government, under government supervision, which goes to Vishnu's point. There is really no incentive then, if they are constructed like that and architected like that, for heroes to be visible or for the labs themselves to be visible with the heroes. And I completely agree with you that the labs have significant capabilities. The labs have significant heroes who are doing significant work. But the mistake we have made for decades is to believe that the military tech doctrine and the military tech roadmap for this nation is equivalent to what the DRDO's roadmap is, or equivalent to, even worse, what the services put out is the strategic military roadmap. And I think that when I say I speak as a political person today, and I speak not necessarily as a spokesperson for the BJP, I really believe what we need to be building today is a military technology strategic roadmap. We have to be clear that given our own geopolitical requirements and our security requirements and our determination to be able to project strength in our own economic self-interest, that these are the core technologies that we must have. Now, we can argue that engines for combat aircraft, we don't need to make design, or we need to have them. But there ought to be clearly a list of capabilities in military technology that we can call our own. Now, I will, of course, respectfully, have a difference with Vishnu in the sense that the Kolkata class destroyers, while they represent great strides in shipbuilding, don't represent enough of a stride in the mission control systems, the combat control systems, the ability to fuse multiple sensors speedily and integrate sophisticated weapon systems to that. Now, I'm not a naval shipbuilding expert by any stretch of imagination, but I would argue that the core technologies lie not in actually building the platforms alone. It is in pieces of the platform, sensors, fusion of sensors, combat control systems, materials, semiconductors that go into these combat control systems. Those an inventory of those strategic technologies, and by the way, Mr. Bedi, those don't have to be 200 numbers. They have to be, in my opinion, 10, 15 core technologies. And I would argue that the Atmanirbhar Bharat must have almost as an appendix B to it. If there is a book called the Atmanirbhar Bharat for national security, it should have one chapter or an appendix to it that says the following 11 technologies are military technology strategic areas of focus, and we will acquire them, design them, co-develop them. Now, I will quickly take you back to this comparison between China and India, and I'll give you this in the broad technology context. In 1987, India and China were almost the same vintage technology. I mean, Arguably, we were ahead. In the early 90s, we were ahead with telecom. China started catching up. You know what China did in the late 80s? China played this I'm a victim of the Cold War card. USA, you hate Russia. We are opposed to Russia. Enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I have just gone through recently a document dated 1987 from the US Congress that lays out in chapter and verse, letter and verse, the amount of technology that the US wanted to transfer to China, including military grade technology that they transferred to China. Now, our approach in the last 30 years, 40 years, what has been for this military technology space, depend on the labs, depend on what is the so-called TOT, and then depend on, in the more recent time, offsets. Now, I mean, Vishnu knows it. He's in media. He understands it, and I think Rahul, you will understand this, and I'm sure all of you understand it. This has been a reasonably, and we can accept this very easily, that this three-pronged approach at creating military tech capability in India has failed. And the only piece that has succeeded is the lab, the DRDO labs. The transfer of technology has been absolutely selective, drafted by a bureaucratic vision of building platforms rather than the core technologies in those platforms. So we know how to make the materials and the fuselage of a Sukhoi 30 MKI, but we still struggle with the core, the radar, the beyond visual range technologies for weapons. So most of the weaponization, combat ability elements are still outside the purview of our capabilities, despite us spending 30 years talking TOT, talking offsets, and talking the labs. And I don't blame anybody on it. I actually blame the political class. And this would be a welcome thing for most of you to hear. I actually think that this has been left, the military technology, strategy, capability building in this country has been left abrogated by the political class to a set of bureaucrats, good, bad, mixed, whatever. And I think it's time that civil society, the country at large, starts asking the question that I think Prapal Singh ji mentioned, which is that people are going to legitimately say, why are we spending $250 million on an aircraft? Why are we spending $6 billion on a destroyer? Why are we just not buying this from Korea or somebody else? So these questions, when the pull and push for the money starts in the budget and the general literacy of a taxpayer, and the involvement in budgeting, the involvement in governance starts growing, these are natural questions that will be put on the table of any government. And I think it is in that context that Atmanirbhar Bharat, a much more clear military technology development, capacity building roadmap that is politically blessed, that is inherently part of Atmanirbhar Bharat, is the way for the future. And I'll just end by saying, I think all of you recognize, understand, agree that the world post-COVID, geopolitically, economically, is a totally different world. And it's a world where there are some neighbors of ours who are going to try and set the rules of the game. We have, through a combination of national pride and our own economic assertiveness, a desire to say no to rules that don't apply to us or that we don't like. And for that, having a strong military capability is not just an academic talking point. It's not about Republic Day. It's about really protecting our flanks as we rise and grow from $3 trillion to $5-6 trillion, which is what we need to do to develop our country and eradicate poverty. So these are no longer isolated issues or islands of debating points. These are all an inherently integrated worldview of India in the coming years and the world in the coming years. Thank you. Jen.
Thank you so much, Rajiv. It was excellent because you gave a completely down-to-earth and frank presentation. Now, let me just make a few points as a person who has actually experienced some of, as I mentioned, great successes and obvious failures. To address what Shom said, one of the things probably we do not recognize is on most of the naval platforms almost, I would say 80% of all weapon systems are completely built in India. I mean, we happen to have contributed most of them. So that is one side. Now, talking about the control systems, which Rajiv rightly mentioned, we have a weakness there in terms of electronic components and basic design. However, BrahMos is an excellent example where the entire missile control systems, apart from the missile itself, composite parts of it, they're all indigenized. And then there is one small example I want to give, which is a great success story. That was the program Dhanush. Now, this was a program where we were challenged to produce a missile which can, not a missile, but a missile system, a launch system, which can launch a missile vertically from a ship. And ship, as you know, does a lot of rolling and pitching. So in that, it has to remain perfectly vertical and there was just one or two other countries at that time who had the capability. And let me tell you, the whole system was built in 18 months and it was fielded, went excellently well. But now, what is the secret behind all this? Actually, and I will easily admit that Navy has been the forerunner in this because first, Navy set up their own design organization decades back. They did not believe that they should only look at foreign designs. They should know the basics of design. So they set up this Naval Shipbuilding Design Bureau, which then went on to the Submarine Design Bureau. And today I must tell you that there is quite a substantial capability there. Now, that is one, but more importantly, and this was brought out by, the first speaker, Brigadier Suresh also, that how do you get the collaboration across? The Dhanush system, why it was possible in 18 months was because the R&D wing, the DRDO, the user, the Navy, and the industry, which happened to be us, but it could be anybody else, all worked as one integrated team after the order was placed. And if any of these wings, the three pillars, if any of them is not there or not involved, it will collapse. Give you an example of the other kind. Pinaka is an excellent system which two of our Tatas and L&T have developed. Now, this is something which is a great system, but took 15 years to develop because it went to 3 marks, Mark 1, 2, and 3, because the army did not get fully involved. Let me be very frank. It was like left to DRDO and the manufacturer. After we made the first Mark 1, the army said, this is not what we wanted. I mean, say it up front and we could have built it. So there is one thing. The other part I want to say is that what Raju brought out is absolutely to the point when it comes to integration and the system design. See, this is a strength or a need which is not really recognized at all. System integration is not really taught in even high-grade colleges today. You segment the whole thing into electronics and mechanical and electrical. It's a thing of the past. It doesn't work. What you need is an integration capability and putting all the things together. This is a very important skill. It has to be it takes decades to perfect it. And the industry, although segmentally it is ready functionally, it is not ready in totality for the simple reason that it is a question of opportunity. One simple thing I'll tell you, when it talks about money being a scarce resource, there are a lot of old equipment lying around which have outlived their utility of all that. Many times it requires reconditioning or the whole thing has to be revamped into putting in modern hardware. Excellent opportunity for getting Indian, learn the hard way, but you learn integration, what it means to integrate one with the other. These are the opportunities we have missed all this time. And this is what we hope will happen in future. Now, we're talking about the money aspect. I want to just throw out one more thing which we can discuss. See, we are definitely going to be hard for resources. I mean, if we talk about the DARPA model and including all the things, I mean, I was a member of the Vijay Kelkar committee in 2004. We looked at all these procurement and all that. Now, just imagine, you're talking about DARPA has got a total of 130 or 140 people of its own. That's it. Okay? They've spent $3.6 billion a year. But they do it through a partnership and they've got full freedom to give that kind of work to industry, to academia, industry of their choice, come out with only those technologies. And then for production, it goes to the main services, which they've got about a 200 billion kind of a resource. Now, the question is, we often mention about DRDO has got so many weaknesses. Yes, it has. I've seen the strengths and weaknesses very, very closely. But let me tell you that we have to, because we are budget constrained, we have to then prioritize very, very carefully. I really like the idea which was projected that, you just cannot develop anything. I think Brigadier rightly said, and later on other people, there's no point in saying we'll do everything. There's no country in the world who succeeded. But if you draw a matrix, what is strategically important and where we have a weakness, where we are really going to be stuck. Now, if you take those top 10, 11, as Rajiv said, I think it is eminently possible to concentrate only on those, but then you need something which is a strategic plan, cutting across passing the party lines, no elections and all that. It is just that nation requires these 10 or 11 technologies to be developed, whether it's electronics. Now, if you invest only in that, it is going to be affordable for a country like India, and we will reach a stage, not immediately, maybe 10 years down the lane. Okay, we have reached a stage of strength. So this is what I just put some thoughts, but I would like the discussion on this aspect. I would like each one of you panel members to just dwell on this and the points made by the other speakers to bring out your thoughts. Starting with Brigadier Suresh, any thoughts on this with relevance to the sum total of what has happened now? Yeah.
I agree with the sir said, sir. The identification of technology and as well as the Rajiv sir said, it is absolutely bang on it, sir. Now, there are some technology even in the industry also we don't find. For example, I will tell you a particular thing. When we do it in military, there is nothing called hydraulics. The hydraulics engineering is never taught engineering in terms of hydraulic engineering equipments. When it comes to, you may be aware, sir, the L&D. It is never taught in a normal course of curriculum. Similarly, the military technology, what we had referred, is absolutely a thing. And in the national education policy, which is going to come up, I request this point can be brought up in the level of the decision makers, so that the military technology can also be can find the particularly into the scheme of things in the draft, which is going to be promulgated later, sir. And right now, sir, the implementation is a long process. We have to believe in the system, number one. We have to believe in ourselves. We have to augment the system and a continued project management monitoring system and with a lot of support.
Yeah.
And
Mr.
lastly,
Harpal Singh, any views on this? Yeah, we'll have to go a bit quickly so as to manage time. Yeah.
Lastly, but not the least, sir, the trust factor to all as a nation. That is, we should whether it is military man, whether it's the private sector, whether it's a MSME, whether it's a public sector, we need to have a trust factor to be built up in the system with adequate fund support. Thank you so much.
Good, great. Mr. Harpal Singh, of course, please be very pointed in your response so that it saves time. Thank you.
Yeah, so very quickly, I think I'm actually rather encouraged by the debate. We've heard, very interesting views and counter views. I think we have identified that there is a whole new deal that needs to emerge. And clearly speaking, if that has to happen, there has to be bipartisan political support for a long-term strategy. A long-term strategy means doesn't matter whether governments come and go. Here are a bunch of priorities. I think Mr. Chandrasekhar draws attention to what are those 8 or 9 technologies that we should base our future strategy on. So rather interesting. And I would say this, and I think it's a point that Som also brought out, which is that in everything, no team ultimately delivers its best if it doesn't have a good audience and it doesn't have a few people who clap behind them. And so I think we need to learn how to clap behind our defense establishment. We are proud citizens of the defense forces, but I think unless and until this new ecosystem is created fundamentally based on trust, we won't succeed as much as we should. And there have been enough successes as much as there have been some limitations. But thank you very much for a very, very interesting conversation.
Mr. Vishnu, would you like to comment a few things, couple of minutes?
Yeah, just 2 minutes, just to take up on what Mr. Chandrasekhar was mentioning. And again, the sense, it's what I was saying, that there is so much criticism very often of Indian weapon systems, when in fact so much has been achieved. For example, some of the points he mentioned about the Project 15 destroyer, mission control systems, combat control systems, and the process of integration and fusion were words used. Each of this has actually been achieved. The mission control system as India the control system, the combat control systems are manufactured by BAL and Philips India. Fusion has been achieved to the extent that you use sensor data from one Project 15 destroyer and fire a missile of the other one. It's been proven. It failed the first time around. It's been proven the second time around. If you look at the Tejas program, radar, quite right. We don't have a radar of our own as yet, but the Uttam active electronically scanned radar is very much under development. It's going to be flight tested. It's already been flight tested on the Tejas aircraft. And BVR weapons, we're trying to make our own Astra. It's been integrated for the Su-30. So these things have actually happened. But I can't agree more with the point that, it is a hodgepodge and it is a mess in that sense. But my only submission over here is that you have achieved areas of great success. And it would help immensely if our armed forces actually accepted that. I won't belabor the point, but for all the points in favor of the T-90 tank, I can list as many points in favor of the Arjun and Arjun Mark 1 tank. But where is the confidence if the end day, the user comes and says, I am the user, I don't trust it. We have gone beyond that.
One of the, just an answer, just this point, confidence comes if there is involvement. Okay. If you stay out and let the DRDO and the industry, whatever it is, in this case, the PSU, just develop something and then you come in. Obviously, by the time you come in, there's something else which has happened in advance in the world, and you want something with the best, which is, I don't blame the services. So how to bring this timeliness is the main thing. I was therefore pointing out that project management is one of the key areas, apart from technology, as Rajiv rightly said. We do not have the recognition of this tremendously important skill. Rahul, you want to say something on this, please?
Just 2 points. I agree entirely with you, Mr. Kotwal, when you say that the what I call the PPP partnership, the private-public partnership between the DRDO, private industry, which has worked, and you said the Navy was involved in the, I'm thinking actually of the 155 millimeter 52 caliber 88 GS howitzer. That seems to have worked. It's had a few setbacks, but I think those are glitches. Secondly, I'd like to say that I think that we should, as a system, learn to dump projects when we realize they're not going to happen. And I have 2 projects in mind. One is the GTRE Kaveri engine. Yeah. It's been in play since 1986. I mean, that's about 34 years, and it's nowhere near fruition. We've had a lot of setbacks in that. And the second project that I think is stillborn, and I don't know why HAL is persisting with it, is the intermediate jet trainer. I mean, the Air Force has changed its entire instruction discipline. It now instructs its pilots from the basic trainer, which is the Swiss Pilatus, onto the advanced jet trainer, which is the British Hawk. And it's done away with the need for the IJT, but HAL is still persisting with developing the AJT, which it has been developing since 1999. So that's another 21 years. So I think we should have the maturity and the grace to dump projects if we realize and close a file, which in the government of India, it's anathema to close a file in the government of India. But I think we should, as a realistic concept, learn to do that.
I fully agree, because I was reading about DARPA. They have got a very good policy of accepting failures, and they've got a procedure for that. Rajiv, you want to add something to this one?
Look, I don't want to be misunderstood. Vishnu, I'm not carping on the fact that we haven't made progress. I'm talking about this in the context of where we ought to be and where we are. And I'm saying that this is the time to take a quantum jump, not just in terms of what we do, but also in terms of the clarity with which we do it. I absolutely believe that there is no way for the current structure of labs-led development to continue. It has to be a much more vibrant, competitive ecosystem of ideas. And I'll give you a small point just before I wind up. If you look at most of the startups in the military tech space today, and I have some experience in investing, and I meet many of these new startups. Most of them, Vishnu, are from the lab system. They are scientists who are leaving the labs. They are scientists who are leaving DPSUs and starting these small shops, whether they are for autonomous vehicles, or they are for fusion, or they are for applications sitting on top of sensors. So there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the man or the woman in the lab today who is a highly capable, competent person, and probably the most skilled in the military technology space. But the overall political and administrative architecture of how we manage military technology development needs reform, needs change, needs a healthy dose of competition, which is brought in via foreign companies, which is brought in by Indian private companies, joint ventures that DPSUs are open to, whatever. But I think that is what I was referring to. I absolutely don't want to be misunderstood as somebody. I'm a big fan of the public sector in terms of what they have developed despite the constraints. So I have no interest in saying that loud and high. But I think the focus, Mr. Kotwal, just to end, is that we need to evolve a paradigm which is in keeping with these objectives and aspirations that we have as a nation.
Excellent. So I've just to make one point. You see, whenever you, I mean, in the corporate world, I'm sure many of you would know this. If you want to achieve something big, first you have to lay it. Okay. Now we've been talking about the 70-30 going to 30-70 from ever since I remember. India needs shocks before it works. 90s, we started doing indigenization because the Soviet Union collapsed. Now we are in for a shock for a different reason. Okay, that's the reason, that's the trigger. Having said that, can anyone in the government say what is the percentage of indigenization actually achieved today? Now, when I say indigenization, please understand, I am talking about actual Indian value added, not total invoicing. Okay. Now, the same DPSUs and many of the corporate sectors also, if not singling out, is something where you show sales value. How much of it has been developed with core technologies or materials or hardware produced in India? Now, those percentages will tell you the true story. Now, having got that number, and there's no shame in this, it is just recognizing where it is. Then you start your budgeting, saying that, okay, we don't want to go all out in all technologies, but some of those things which are strategically important, in those are the cases which we are going to develop in a partnership mode. The reason why I'm talking about partnership with private industry is you get the combination of a high-end research, which is the DRDO. There is no way of replacing or anything like that in industry. I know where I learned my technologies from. It is from 3 organizations, ISRO, Nuclear, and DRDO. Let's be clear. Having said that, take the case of 3 cases I'll give you. The supercomputer was developed because of denial. Nuclear was developed because, again, of denial, because I have gone through the sanctions. And ISRO, please remember, if it had been freely available, where we are. So these are the triggers. But out of the 3, you will find only one, that is ISRO, has continued as a national program. What has happened to the famous capability we developed in supercomputers? India had developed it. We have forgotten it because we go commercial. We go fully on the private sector and forget that there's so much available. So this partnership model gets the best of everything. Commercial people have got a pressure. We are answerable to shareholders and we know what the pressure is. So that is the pressure, but we don't have enough research and technology going on ourselves. So this combination is the key, and the faster it happens, the better it is. The other part, Shom, where I fully recognize, in fact, I can reel out so many success stories, but please recognize you have to look at output versus input. And when you look at that input, I mean, you look at the hundreds of thousands of people employed and what are they producing, and go by any yardstick. Compare yourself. There has to be a benchmark. You have to recognize that this is the output we are producing, and this applies equally to ISRO. I'm saying that very openly. So there is a nuclear, there's an ISRO, there's a DRDO, there are 9 big DPSUs. Okay, fine. There is a certain amount of resource, national resource has gone in. How much is the related output? There will be success stories, there will be failures, bound to happen. So this is all I'm saying. I think what we need, as everyone has agreed, that we need a national security policy, cutting across political thinking and all that, but national thinking in a long term with a strategy to invest in selected areas which will hurt us or help us the most. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting discussion. I myself learned a lot from that. Thank you, sir. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It's an honor.
Thank you. So I go back to the organizers. I must thank the organizers for giving us this opportunity. Thank you.